Greetings. I'm your host, Dat Work. I'm coming to you today with this last episode or commentary on POUDRE School District and its destruction of young black men inside of the school district. This is K through 12. I'm waiting until after this Thanksgiving break because I will have a conversation with administration in reference to the actual data of the sense of belonging that all black students feel in POUDRE School District. I've been doing the work for a while, and I think people think I'm just talking, so I made an attempt, which came to reality, to apply for the data in which the district has been holding on to and still can't seem to delineate or differentiate what acts of racism are included inside their umbrella term of discrimination. And this is an issue that's going to get worked out this year. And you can bet on that. So if you don't believe it, here is the beginnings of what I've been working on since August. I have all the data. If they like bar graphs and they want to see incident reports based on bias and the sense of belonging in the school district, I have it all. And now we're going to get to work. And we're not going to play this game that we've been playing for a long time. And I'll tell you why. Because the system in which we exist in is cracking. This is the moment when awareness becomes responsibility. It is the moment where I didn't know can no longer serve as a form of protection for these young people in the school district. This is where I'm shifting from a diagnosis to design, from observation to the obligation we all have, from analysis to actual accountability. And up to this point, I've explored how black boys are positioned in predominantly white schools, and I've explained exactly how bias, culture, curriculum, and environment converge to shape their experience. But knowledge alone doesn't change the system. We, the people, do, and the adults have a responsibility. And this part is about what educators, leaders, and institutions must do. They must do if they actually expect to produce different outcomes than what exists on paper from your own data. Not the performative changes, we can't do that anymore. Not the cosmetic reforms, not the equity-themed initiatives that decorate brochures and fade out in 3 months, and we forget about them. I'm talking about real change. Real change, that it requires structural change, it requires cultural change, and it must happen. And let's get in right now to what that requires. The first shift that I'm addressing is adult reflection before student correction. Adult reflection before you correct a student. Because schools are built on the assumption that student behavior must change. But the truth is exactly the opposite. It is the adults who must change first. And we have to understand this. A school cannot discipline its way out of a cultural problem. A school cannot police its way out of a bias problem. A school cannot punish its way out of a misunderstanding problem. This can no longer be the tactics or the policy. So when black young men react to racialized stress, the question educators must ask is not, what's wrong with him? Because I hear that all the time. The question they must ask is, what happened in this environment to create this reaction? And what is my role in it? This shift is foundational, and it forces educators to examine interpretation that they misunderstand. It forces them to examine tone. It forces them to examine body language. It forces them to understand assumptions. It forces them to understand triggers. It forces them to understand cultural fluency. It forces them to understand bias patterns. It forces them to understand relational habits. It forces them to understand disciplinary reflexes. It forces them to understand communication choices. And the truth is, most educators have never been fully trained to see themselves as variables in a student's outcomes. But you are. You absolutely are. And in fact, they are one of the most powerful variables in the building. And we claim we know this. This first shift requires humility, discomfort, and absolute courage. Many avoid it because it exposes inconvenient truths that we want to hide. But unless educators are willing to examine themselves, to truly examine themselves, they will replicate the very structures they say they want to dismantle. And the second is we have to shift from control to connection. Connection is the greatest thing we can do with these young people. The most harmful misconception in schooling is that somehow control in our minds equals safety. For young Black men, that belief becomes the foundation of disproportionality. When a school begins to prioritize compliance, which they love to use, forms of silence, what they want to call stillness, and these ideas of this uniformity, Black young men are punished for simply being who they are inside of your system. But the research has been clear. Connection, not control, is what creates safety. Connection, not control, creates safety. And connection looks like teachers listening, truly listening before reacting. Adults regulating themselves before they discipline a child. Adults regulating themselves before they discipline a child. Relationship work happening before academic demands. You have to build relationships. And trust building happening intentionally, not incidentally. We don't build this trust with them. Teachers understanding cultural communication styles, which most don't. And they claim they think they do. Educators using restorative, not punitive practices, but real restorative practices. Connection requires educators to approach discipline as a relational process, not a power struggle to be one. No one wins in this, and the child definitely doesn't. This is a shift from them saying, do what I say because I'm the authority, to maybe I need to understand what is happening beneath your behavior, the why. Connection is not soft. Connection is not permissive. Connection is not forms of coddling children. That's not what I'm talking about. But connection is effective. It's truly effective. And for many young Black men, connection has been the missing their entire educational lives, and trust. And the third shift is belonging as a form of true infrastructure inside this district. I've already established the science behind belonging. Belonging is a neurological requirement for learning, and it absolutely is. But in most schools, belonging is treated as an extra, not a core function. True belonging. This is the structural redesign schools must confront if they want to help young men. Belonging must be built into the architecture of the school, to the blueprints of this school. That's in the curriculum. You have to have it in your advisory systems. It must exist in relationship building protocols daily. Teacher trainings, not one-off trainings, but real trainings. Expectations of staff to learn. Disciplinary design must change. The physical environment in which we see inside these schools, the hiring practices, the after-school programs like I run, and kids are being bullied or told by teachers they shouldn't be in them. School rituals and celebrations need to change. Black young men need to walk into a building and see sometimes people who look like them, or folks they can truly trust, content that represents them, not just one-offs, adults who actually care about their reality. System designed for their safety. Spaces created for them to express themselves. Mentors who affirm their identity. Cultural touch points that validate, not erase. Because if belonging is not deliberately constructed, exclusion becomes automatic. It becomes standard. Schools that do not intentionally design for belonging will continue to unintentionally design for harm. They will unintentionally and sometimes intentionally design for harm. We talk about the curriculum. We already know curriculum must be more than what we used to call multicultural. It must be anti-racist, humanizing, and identity affirming. But God forbid we talk about racism. God forbid. So what does that look like? Maybe we begin with Black history taught beyond tragedy. And I hope to see this year in Fort Collins High School. Black innovation taught as foundational. Black authors integrated across grade levels, because I can tell you they learn about them here in my program. African philosophy, sciences, and civilizations included in the world curricula, in the correct manner. Texts that explore the fullness of Black identity. And representation that is not tokenized, because I see that all the time. Accuracy is discussing systems, not stereotypes about people. Curriculum, like all that I've said before, is not neutral. It tells students whose knowledge matters, whose stories matter, and who the world belongs to, and who this city and the school belongs to. So if young Black men never see themselves aligned with brilliance, leadership, creativity, or intellectual legacy, it is not their identity that is limited. It is the curriculum that is impoverished. When curriculum expands, identity expands. When identity expands, all possibilities begin to expand. Schools must choose whether they will keep offering young Black men a starved version of themselves or the full vision of who they can become. And the greatest shift that needs to happen in this school district is accountability as real culture, not consequences. And here's the hardest part. Here's the hardest part for most schools to really accept. Accountability must apply to the adults with the same consistency it is applied to students. It must apply to the adults with the same consistency, because right now discipline systems are built entirely on student accountability. He needs to fix his behavior. He needs to learn to calm down and control himself. He needs to change the way he thinks. He needs to change his mindset. This is what we hear all the time. But where is the accountability when adults misinterpret behavior? Where is the accountability when bias shows up in referrals? Where is the accountability when expectations are lowered? Where is the accountability when microaggressions pile up inside of a child? Where's the accountability when belonging is neglected consistently? Where is the accountability when a teacher escalates instead of de-escalating? Where is the accountability when a student is pushed out instead of pulled in? Where is it? I'll tell you, a system that holds children accountability but not adults is not a system built on any form of justice at all. It is a system simply built on control. And this is what we see. To transform schools for young Black men, accountability must shift. It must shift from punishment for students to responsibility for adults, from punishment for students to responsibility for adults. And we have to. This includes reviewing discipline data monthly, maybe auditing teacher-level disparities and seeing what that looks like, unless we're scared to do it. Requiring cultural competency as a job expectation, not some one-off. Using equity data to evaluate leadership. Removing this false punitive patterns for policy. Providing forms of coaching for harmful interactions. Intervening when educators weaponize what they want to call professionalism. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've heard that one. Holding departments accountable for curriculum gaps. Building actual restorative structures school-wide, and maybe not the way we've been doing it. Accountability is not a threat. It is an ethical obligation. It is an ethical obligation. And I'm going to ask this radical question that I've been asking inside myself. What is the purpose of school? What is the purpose of school? If the purpose is control, order, and compliance, then the system will continue to fail young black men. If the purpose is simply academic ranking, then young black boys will continue to be tracked instead of being taken care of and lifted up. If the purpose is simply to protect the comfort of the adults, the young black boys will continue to shrink themselves to survive. But, I tell you, if the purpose is human development, liberation, self-actualization, identity, belonging, brilliance, then the entire architecture and blueprint and foundation must do an overhaul, and it must change. Schools must become a place where differences is expected, not managed. It must become a place where culture is understood and not feared and misunderstood. Identity is affirmed, not regulated and surveilled. Mistakes are treated as learning, not criminality. Diversity is structural, not symbolic. Equity is truly foundational and not episodic. The question is not whether schools can change. The question is whether they will choose to. And that includes the district in which my son attends and the students that I try to serve after school. So I hope that these conversations move forward and that we work hard to make sure that we are looking at ourselves as adults and educators. That we are learning and not thinking we know everything, and really functioning in forms of humility that allow us to evolve and to grow. And stop thinking we have it all figured out. I don't care how long you have taught in a school district. It does not mean you have worked hard enough to understand these realities. Young black men are not a problem to solve. They are the possibilities to cultivate. They are brilliance waiting to be recognized. They are identities waiting to simply be affirmed. They are futures waiting to be unleashed. But they can't do this alone. They cannot do it alone. Schools must change. Adults must change. Systems must change, and cultures inside the schools must change. Not someday, not eventually, not when convenient, but right now. I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving dinner. I'm your host, That Work.